Welcome to today's Roads to Research. My name is Gwen Camden. I'm speaking on behalf of the Office of Research, welcoming the first set of two sets of presenters from our Doctor in Social Science cohort. These students are starting their second year of their four-year program, and so they're going to present a brief overview of their proposed research. We're giving them 15 minutes to do this brief introduction, followed by 5 minutes for questions from the audience. So there's three speakers today. Holly Claremont, Jacquie Gilson, and Milton Almeida. And following this 1 hour presentation is guest speaker Ken Christie, who will be speaking about how to get passionate and stay motivated in the world of research. You're welcome to stay to that if it works with your work schedule. I do need to remind you that this session is being recorded, so please be aware of that when asking questions and such. It'll be posted on YouTube, and nobody's going to watch it later. So our first speaker today is Holly Claremont. She'll be presenting Rare and Resilient, Developing Management and Governance Structures for At-Risk Ecosystems. Holly.
Hi, can everybody hear me okay? The rest of my cohort has a lot more experience in public speaking, so rest assured this will get better for you. I'm going to start off with an Aldo Leopold quote, and it was Rural Road's very own Rick Cool who recently reminded me of this quote at an AGM for Garry Oak Ecosystem Recovery Team. And she's gone. That help? Can you hear me now? Thank you. Thank you, Robin. And Garry Oak Ecosystems Recovery Team is one of 3 nonprofits that I work with. And anyway, Aldo Leopold said, one of the penalties of an ecological education is that one lives alone in a world of wounds. Much of the damage inflicted on land is quite invisible to laymen. An ecologist must either harden his shell and make believe that the consequences of science are none of his business, or he must be the doctor who sees the marks of death in a community that believes itself well and does not want to be told otherwise. The picture that you see there was taken on campus, and while many people will see a lovely little waterfall in the forest, what I see is a precious rare ecosystem at the edge of extinction that's being ravaged by invasive species. If I voice these things like this too often or in the wrong places, people scatter, they avoid me. So it's much easier to act as if everything's okay, but in my heart, I know that's not doing anything for the future of our children. So with my research, I hope to begin to heal the wounds and to tell a story that people look forward to hearing, and unfortunately that's not till 2015. So in general, my study is about saving biodiversity, the variety of life. And this diagram speaks to planetary boundaries, the safe area being green, and it shows how at a global scale that we're well beyond our safe thresholds for biodiversity loss. Extinctions, species at risk, and ecosystems at risk are all indicators of biodiversity loss. Climate change gets all the attention, but biodiversity loss is at least equally important, and every time we eliminate species and ecosystems, we're losing our options in terms of adapting to climate change. There's a flagship publication on the Convention on Biological Diversity that suggested that the problem needs to be addressed at a regional level, and it offered UNESCO biosphere reserves as a vehicle to do this. And it just so happens that I live in a biosphere reserve. Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve is on the Mid-Island, and it supports the same types of at-risk ecosystems that you can see out these windows at Rural Roads. To give you some orientation, it includes the city of Parksville, the town of Qualicum Beach, and several rural communities. So what are biosphere reserves? Well, the Canadian Biosphere Reserve Association says that they're places where nature nurtures the minds, hearts, and bodies of the people, and the people strive to live gently and maintain vital processes to sustain themselves and the other species that share the biosphere. Well, that sounds really lovely, but it's easier said than done. Currently, in Mount Arrowsmith, the Biosphere Reserve is confronting the loss of its Biosphere Reserve status, and if it loses it, it may just be the first one in the world ever to do that. Not exactly a label that one wants to wear, so they've been asked to develop a strategy and action plan by 2013. So on that happy note, this is my case study area. So it's going to be focused on the management and governance of at-risk ecosystems in the lower elevations of the Biosphere Reserve, and in particular the area that's shown in lime green. And that lime green area is part of the Coastal Douglas Fir Biogeoclimatic Zone, or what we call the CDF, and we're also in the CDF here. The province is divided into 16 of these zones, and the CDF is the smallest. And it's more than Douglas fir trees. It includes estuaries and wetlands and riparian areas and old-growth forests and Gary oak meadows and rocky islets and other types of ecosystems, and also people. So the extent, the structure, and the diversity of these ecosystems that greeted the first Europeans are nearly gone. And our challenges began with the ENN land grant to Robert Dunsmuir, who I think you've probably all heard of, in the late 1800s, when a huge chunk of southeast Vancouver Island was instantly privatized. So today, remnant natural areas continue to be developed, the last old forests continue to be harvested, and areas that we think are protected continue to be degraded. So we're at a tipping point. And if you want to see what things look like when ecosystems tip over a threshold, think cod fishery or Caribbean algae as opposed to Caribbean coral reefs. So what have we done about it? Well, we've done plenty. We've mapped sensitive ecosystems, and we've identified threats, and we've created all kinds of tools to set priorities for action, and we've developed a library of best practices and green bylaws toolkits and all sorts of things. And we've implemented a host of stewardship programs, landowner contact, all sorts of things. And we like these places. So why are we continuing to develop and degrade them into oblivion? Where's the disconnect? I'm convinced that the answer lies in social science, and that's why I'm here, and in understanding social ecological systems, a term coined by resilience thinkers to formalize the notion that humans are a part of nature. And the ideas of humans and nature as inseparable is also embedded in the UNESCO biosphere concept. And Earth, of course, is the largest of the social ecological systems, and likewise, but the Biosphere Reserve and the CDF are considered social ecological systems. And a question that I've been contemplating for some time now is this: if the natural and the social are intertwined in so many ways, why is there a significant and persistent divide between the natural and the social sciences? And while this isn't my research question, it underscores everything that I'm attempting to do with my research and my goal to integrate the natural and the social sciences. So I plan to conduct a mixed methods RA and MABR, mainly as TDAR. I could be the queen of acronyms. I plan to conduct a mixed methods resilience assessment in Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve, mainly as transdisciplinary action research. And resilience assessment is a framework to study social ecological systems. It looks at historical timelines, thresholds, cycles, cross-scale interactions, and so on. And quite recently, understanding social relationships became an integral part of resilience assessment in the form of social ecological network analysis. And this is where I will begin. So I plan to use social ecological network analysis to examine 3 cases in Mount Arrowsmith Biosphere Reserve, and the first one is fondly known as DL33. This is Crown Forest. It's globally and provincially imperiled, and it supports Roosevelt elk and other at-risk species. The forest was harvested for the economic benefit of Nanu's First Nation. The wood was sold to a forest company with forest stewardship certification. Local governments and environmental groups and others strongly encouraged the province to reconsider its decision. And of course, it's harvested now. And the First Nation is now suing the environmentalists that attempted to block the harvest. The second case is Fairwinds. Fairwinds is a golf course and residential development with several types of endangered ecosystems. Its neighborhood plan was highly contentious. It polarized communities and it raised the ire of environmentalists. The plan has been approved, but subdivision and other steps are still to come. And the third case, Hago, Canada geese. Anybody who's walked to the parking lot knows all about these guys. Offspring of introduced birds, many of which don't migrate. They're decimating estuary and marsh ecosystems on Crown and privately owned protected areas on the Mid-Island, with profound implications for fisheries in particular. The regulators, the Canadian Wildlife Service and the Provincial Ministry of Environment, which authorized the transplantation of the geese in the 60s and 70s, are dragging their feet. Some local governments are spending tons of money for managing these birds. Some people are calling for a cull, others are adamantly opposed to a cull. So these are my research questions. The first one, what social and social ecological factors constrain conservation action for at-risk ecosystems, and how can these be reduced or overcome? And here I'm not merely talking about general constraints like the extent of private land ownership or funding for programs and acquisition and the like. I'm talking about social psychological constraints, value, sense of place, and the things that people aren't talking about. Did activism to protect DL33 actually facilitate its demise? We have no private property rights per se in BC, so why are private landowners securing zoning that planners are under no obligation to extend to them? And why is the Canadian Wildlife Service facilitating the degradation of its own national wildlife area? And I have a second question. How does social ecological network analysis and resilience assessment in a biosphere reserve setting contribute to the development of management and governance structures and processes that better protect CDF ecosystems? And this is intricately tied to the action research. Sorry about my flipping pages here. So what I'm hoping for at the end of the day is a new model for land and natural resource planning and management, and champions to move it forward. And I'll bring you back to Aldo Leopold. And this is a man who lived from 1887 to 1948. And I'll draw your vision to the last sentence. It says, to keep every cog in wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. So that's it.
5 minutes for questions.
I'm off the hook. No questions or comments?
Oh, I'm just interested in the Canada goose issue. So they're decimating the riverbeds, I assume, and there's an activist group that's trying to protect those riverbeds, but there's an activist group trying to protect the Canada geese as well and the rights of the Canada geese. Are those environmental movements pitted against each other, or environmental groups?
Not really. The on the Mid-Island, there isn't really a group that is actually opposing it. You'll see letters to the newspapers and that sort of thing opposing any kind of active culling of the birds. On a broader scale, there's an international group known as the Friends of Canada Geese, and they are actively, if culls or anything close to looking like a cull happens in Kelowna or in Vancouver. At one time, they tried to get rid of birds in Stanley Park, and they just moved them. They didn't kill them. That brought a lot of attention to the concept. On the Mid-Island, the estuaries are in such bad condition, and the implications are so great that it has quite a tremendous amount of support. It has.
Thanks, Holly. I really like the way you developed your proposal in the last year since we talked about it. Your second research question, where you want to look at the effects of doing this assessment, can you tell us a little bit about how you would do that?
In general, that question will be answered through a couple of different ways. One is through the resilience assessment process, and what I'm hoping to do is have different mechanisms to measure different aspects of that process. But there's also a couple of other things that are going on. There's two separate issues in the communities. One is the Biosphere Reserve strategy and action planning process that I was telling you about. And the other one is there's a CDF, a Coastal Douglas Fir strategy and technical group that has formed, and they're trying to move things forward. And I'm interacting with both of those processes. So a lot of flow will happen back and forth. And I guess at the end of the day, I'll be able to assess how much those processes have influenced what's going on, because I suspect some of the people that I've identified through the social ecological network analysis to participate in the resilience assessment and the action research will be associated with these teams that are doing this work. Does that make sense?
Are you going to, in your methodology, are you thinking, because you live in the area, I'm just wondering, have you thought about using any kind of reflexive approach as one of your methods?
Reflexive approach. Reflexivity is going to be paramount in this because I'm involved in every single one of these in various ways. And in some ways, I'm central to them. So I have to be really transparent, and I have to be very cognizant of what I'm doing all the way through. So it's definitely a part of what I'm doing. As far as having in terms of part of the methodology, I think action research really lends itself to that. Social ecological network analysis, perhaps not so much, but I'm going to have to be really careful with that for sure.
Or embrace it, right? Like you could actually be part of the methodology in terms of, I think often we try to be unbiased, but reflexivity can also be used as a piece where you're actually allowing your own voice to come into your work. So it might be something to consider.
I have and I will. Thank you. Anyone else? Thank you for having me.
Our next presenter is... please come. Jacquie Gilson will be presenting Reforming Heritage Interpretation, Using Place to Inspire Transformations That Lead to Actions. And I'll go take my place.
Used to introducing myself, so I thought I'll just get going here. Okay, I have controls. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here, and welcome to Roads to Research. As Gwen mentioned, I'm Jacquie Gilson, and my title changed a little bit from the one she read out. So, can everybody hear me? Especially if I just look this way. I don't see it on the teleprompter here, which does mean I have to kind of look this way to look on the screen. Okay, anyway, it's okay. Okay, so Reforming Heritage Interpretation, there we go. Inspiring connection to place for visitors in the current era. And here's my outline for everything I will cover in the next 12 minutes or so. Very quickly, obviously, for each one. So I'm talking about heritage interpretation. Here's a few images to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So we are the people who take you on a guided hike to the top of a mountain to see things like the amazing Burgess Shale that are 505 million years old. Hold up antlers and explain to people the difference between mule deer antlers and elk antlers and horns and all those things, and then how you can go out and see some wildlife. We dress up in costumes and invite you into historic sites. We get you up on stage, and I could do this here today, but I won't, and dress you up like a brown or a black bear and a grizzly bear, so you find out the difference. And we tell stories, and I love that little picture in the corner there. She's telling the story to the teddy bear and to the audience. But we do interpretation through personal services, personally connecting with people, but we also offer interpretation in non-personal means. So for instance, those signs you'll see on the roadside, on historic buildings, when you get to go and touch a pelt of an animal. The little fuzzy picture on the side is an explorer's booklet. It's activities for kids to do with their families to explore the parks. And brochures like this one that's explaining the difference between the bears and how you can stay safe. So we do lots of fun things, and so the topic area of interest then for me is this field of interpretation. We define it as a mission-based communication process that forges emotional and intellectual connections between the interests of the audience and the meanings inherent in the resource. And so heritage interpretation, which I've shortened to HI throughout, is something that takes place at sites such as parks and protected areas, zoos, museums, art galleries, and so on. I'm sure everybody's been to places like that and participated or looked at signs. And so we do include in heritage, we do think natural and cultural heritage. So the problem that I'm addressing is that sites that offer heritage interpretation have recently undergone kind of an organizational shift. Not every single one, but generally the trend is towards reflecting a more visitor-focused approach at the sites. And so in interpretation, we need to decide how and what this will look like for us to be part of this visitor-focused approach. So this, in my opinion, gives us a really exciting opportunity to reconsider what the goals, the strategies, the techniques that make up our field, our profession. And so this involves, or could include, reconsidering this linear assumption upon which our field is based. And this is the notion that if you have interpretation of a place, that people will gain understanding, and that through understanding they'll appreciate, and through appreciate they will protect that place and hopefully beyond. And that very linear assumption has kind of formed the basis of our field. And as I note there, it's constantly being questioned in our field, but I think now is a really good opportunity to really take a closer look at it. So my positionality, I am an interpretation coordinator for Parks Canada and the mountain parks. So Lake Louise, Yoho, and Kootenay is the area I work in. We see lots of visitors, as you can imagine. And my personal positionality, you see there, the key point is, besides the fact that I've got 2 girls at home that are missing me. No, they're not at all. They're 20 and 23, so they don't care what I'm doing. But is that my mother raised us as a real strong advocate for education. And so I always have to remember that while I may be really keen on education, not everybody necessarily is. So that's important for me to remember. So I am pragmatic. I'm driven to generate applied research. I believe that individuals create meaning together, and that individual actions are required to change the world. And I also appreciate what's happened before in our field, but acknowledge that there is room for improvement. My research question as of today, and it's a moving target, so who knows, but I'm getting there, I think. So the question is, how can heritage interpretation in practice best inspire connections between visitors and place within the realities of the current era? And so by current era, and this was Elliot last year's class, got me thinking about all these impacts in our world now, but we've got new audiences coming to our sites, new Canadians, we've got all these technological advances, we've got the thing known as nature deficit disorder in children and in adults. We have reduced number of visitors at sites, many of the sites. Visitor expectations are changing. People generally are lacking a connection to place nowadays in terms of not necessarily growing up in one spot, but all the moving around people are doing, etc. Sub-questions I'm looking at now is, what does the goal of inspiring connections really mean? And that is part of our definition and what our field is based on. So what does that really mean? And if you know me, I like stickies. And so I have stickies all over my office that say, so what and what's next, to remind me that these are the kinds of questions I'm asking. What are other goals for heritage interpretation in the current era? And I'm also looking at how can transformational learning theory maybe contribute to interpretation in this current era. And then I'm also interested in the role that place does play in interpretation. So the theoretical framework I'm looking at using is this transformational learning theory, and using it to kind of shine a new light on the field of heritage interpretation. I think that idea came from Brian Belcher last year, and theoretical frameworks, shining lights. So transformational learning, one of the definitions is that it's about dramatic and fundamental change in the way we see ourselves and the world in which we live. So, and this is because Fernando got me thinking about X's and Y's and variables. So while I was doodling yesterday, I was kind of trying to come up with a way to picture this topic in my head. So these aren't really actually XY variables. I'm not trying to show causality, just so you know. So I'm thinking that we have visitors and we have place, right? And in heritage interpretation, we're looking at the fact that we think we're kind of mediating between the two, or that's our role. And we're being asked to do a better job at it, really, and part of this new focus in the agency. So then I'm saying, well, if I take this transformative learning theory as my lens and kind of use it to look at our field, what can that do in terms of contributing the bringing together of the visitor and the place? And then at the same time, I think we can be addressing, really what is the end we're after. So that's my visual for the day. So methodology, I'm looking at doing transformative and pragmatic, kind of comes from my positionality and who I am. I am looking at appreciative inquiry and action research, and perhaps bringing the two together, and I know some work has been done on bringing the two together, with appreciative inquiry taking account of the positive, what's gone before, and action research looking more at the problem and how we can go forward. So I am considering merging those two. In terms of research methods, at this point, and again, I'm open, I'm still exploring, I'm looking at possibly focus groups with practicing interpreters from both natural and cultural heritage sites, and in the group discussing how they feel we can best be inspiring connections in visitors using transformational learning theory, and then to get them to go out and implement their ideas, and then meet with them after one-on-one to get their sense of what's working and their impressions, that sort of thing, and then possibly reconvening them all again to talk about overall what worked and how they feel. They may be able to improve and change their programming to create that better connection. So outputs, there's just my little list, and we talked this morning about other ones that I think are interesting, so who knows what I'll add in there, but I think the one I want to highlight, because I think it's kind of fun, is that I am going off to Hawaii in May, and I have to go and do this talk. I know. I know. I'm actually going to be speaking about inspiration in the field of interpretation, what it means, and sort of breaking it down as a construct, some research I've been doing, so I'm kind of interested in that. And the book at the end, well, that's just because I'm feeling ambitious. So, intended outcomes, hopefully add some value to the interpretation literature. Also, testing of transformational learning theory in a non-formal education setting, which hasn't been done a whole lot, according to the literature I've read. Also, the idea of combining interpretation and place study and the value of place and transformational learning, taking all three together, I'm pretty sure has not been done. And I also feel that an outcome of working with actual frontline interpreters in the project would get them actively involved in determining how to best connect visitors, and they're the ones who deal with the visitors on a case, one-by-one basis, and getting them implementing some ideas, so the idea of action research, getting things going right away. And also, I think there's learning in there for the interpreters and myself in terms of using the elements of transformational learning, the experiences, the reflection, the dialogue, to be continuously improving and changing. So kind of hoping to use transformational learning at both kind of the interpreter training and staff level and out with the visitors. And so my committee right now, Dr. Leslie Curthoy is with Lakehead University, and I did select her because of her heritage interpretation experience. And you'll see the rest of my list is TBD. And to be honest, I haven't really had a whole lot of time to work on this one. So I do need a co-supervisor from Royal Roads, since Leslie is from a different university. Would like to have somebody who's involved in transformational learning theory and also a methodology research methods person. So I'm still working and hoping to talk to Marilyn Taylor. Is she there? So we shall see. Anyway, okay, so it's actually really exciting, and it's it's been a great couple of years, and so thanks to everybody that's sharing it with me, and thoughts, ideas, comments, all welcome. Thank you. Right, Fernando.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Jackie. I think you have very good elements to proceed, in my view. One is that you have a theory behind, which is your sequence from interpretation, understanding, appreciation. Now, what you have to do is falsify that.
Okay, right.
Okay.
Reject the null hypothesis.
Some people may, yeah, exactly. No, yeah, that's exactly it. Some people may interpret, but may not protect.
Right,
Some people may understand, but may
Right.
not appreciate.
right, that's right.
And you have the possibility. And the second one that I like is testing on different populations, New Canadians versus mainstream, let's say, or technologically illiterate with literate,
Right,
and so on. So, looks like very good.
yeah, thank you. Hi, Robin.
And so I may have missed it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, given the people, client-centered, however you frame that, shift in thinking, didn't seem like your focus was on interpreters, and I'm
Right.
wondering how you would, or what your thoughts are about including whatever, focus groups, interviews, surveys, something, with those people that are going to be doing something
Right,
with place and connecting or otherwise.
right.
What your
Yeah.
thoughts are.
Good question, and I anticipated that. So I agree that it would be great to focus on visitors, et cetera. And so I think just for my own interests and my interest in interpretation training and pedagogy, that I would like to start with interpreters, and possibly, and depending on how much time I have, actually get into more involving visitors. So it's still fuzzy in my mind whether there is a way I can do both. So yeah, certainly, I mean, it makes sense in terms of saying that we want to be visitor-centered, but I know that we have to get the interpreters on board too, because they are the ones who are out there, and they're pretty independent and I don't want to say stubborn, but they're. So I do think that's an important group to work with. So yeah, good point, and I'm trying to figure it out.
Probably a point was of curiosity, and maybe, I mean, some of the things we were talking about, like a blog or something that
Yes, yeah.
can engage others in the conversation
Right.
without necessarily drawing in focus groups or whatever, but to
Yeah.
be able to engage people in the thinking around what that
Right.
might look like,
Yeah.
might be a possibility.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good idea for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Hello.
Hi, there's a piece of work you might be interested in that comes out of St. FX. It's by Elizabeth Lane. She
Okay.
did a piece of work with Alcana National Park
Mhm.
and bringing new immigrants into
Yes.
the area for the first time. Are you familiar with it?
It sounds familiar, yeah, yeah.
Because she's encountered some perspective and place transformation elements as well, so it might be something that you find
Yeah.
useful in your research.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it does sound familiar. I'll have to dig for it though. Thanks. Yeah.
Hi. Have you thought of observation as an approach to actually take tours and to observe the whole interaction between guides and visitors?
Right, I hadn't thought about it, but we do that anyway as part of our supervising our employees, our interpreters. So yeah, doing that officially. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but yeah, it's potential for sure.
Tony Seaton does a lot of that work where he's taking bus tours and these kinds of things and seeing that interaction. And
Right,
Cronus is another one you might want to look
Okay.
at. And he talks about co-constructing meaning between guides and visitors.
okay,
So,
yeah, good. Sounds good.
have you thought of best practices in the world where you'd actually see this at work? Any particular, say, U.S. Park Service or museums in England or anything like that?
Yeah, and I've done some digging. I have to do some more looking at, especially worldwide. We tend to focus on states and their practices, and ours to somewhat extent. But yeah, no, I think it's on my list of to-dos is to check more worldwide what's going on and in interpretation and what best practices and where people feel they are having success at connecting visitors with place. So yeah, a to-do. Yeah.
So if you'd like some help, I have some
Okay,
information.
super. Thank you.
Just
Yeah.
a suggestion for you as well. One of the things that you might want to consider is the link with learning.
Right.
And there's some really wonderful work done at the South Florida Science Center on
Okay.
working with docents in terms of what is
Right.
what is that experience of changing what is, this is the right answer, this is what is happening here, to a more of an experiential
Right.
discovery approach. And
Right.
Fred Steyer's the person who's done some really exciting work on that.
Okay, good.
So
Good to
I'm
know,
glad to
yeah.
share that with you too.
Yeah, thank you, that's great.
One other small point, which is action research is not necessarily just about solving problems.
Right.
Because that actually would put that in, somewhat into conflict with your appreciative inquiry
Yes, yeah.
strategy. So
For sure.
both
Yeah.
of those are really, really good.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. Mike?
Just more of a question. Was there a consideration of the people who see place as place? For example, the First Nations people that are often considered visitors?
Right. Yeah, good one, yeah. Haven't really thought about that, but yeah, it's a good point, for sure.
Danforth and
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and, yeah, issues that we deal with in parks, with our neighbors, and, yep, good point. Oh, one more. Thanks.
Thank you for the wonderful presentation.
Thank
I'm
you.
wondering if there might be a link as well between your action research overarching methodology and experiential methods that might come from transformative learning theory. And if potentially, you know, everyone will give you their own ideas, but
Right.
potentially to incorporate workshopping the workshops
Right.
as part of your methods.
Right, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. No, I think that's, yeah, that's appealing for sure, yeah. Great, thanks, everybody, lots of good ideas.
Jackie has an amazing sense of internal timing. Our next presenter is Milton Almeida, who will be presenting Leadership Practices Achieving Sustainable Development in Tourism. And I'm sure that title's changed. Milton. Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you all for taking time out of your valuable days, chock-a-block days, to spend some time here with me. What I'll talk to you today a little bit is about the context of my research, the methodology, some of the intended methods, and a little bit about the research design. So over the next 10 or 12 minutes, and sort of during the question period, I would encourage you to think, you know, sort of what else I could be doing, what methods I could be doing to get some of the information that I need. And around the methodological piece, around the question, please, do you see the linkages, and does that make sense to you as my learned colleagues here? So the title is Leadership Practices Achieving Sustainable Development in Tourism. And why? I guess why I'm interested in tourism and sustainability is, this is a picture of a hotel that I was part of the opening in Bucharest in Romania. And it was a 5-star hotel, belonged to Hilton. And on our doorstep, literally, there were homeless people and, you know, an environment that was undergoing a tremendous amount of pressure. And really emblematic of what some of the tensions we feel, or I feel, in regards to tourism, sustainable tourism, and our role in trying to mitigate some of that. So what I want to accomplish in this research, or I guess this hotel opened in 1997, and so this has been this gestation since then. What I really want to accomplish is tourism, or a sense that tourism can provide really positive outcomes in communities. So my research interests are in leadership development, and sustainable tourism development. I own a coaching, consulting, and training practice here in Victoria, work all over the country, and do a lot of traveling, and work mostly with hotel organizations. Just to set a little bit of the context of tourism, these are some figures for the UN WTO, stands for the United Nations World Tourism Organization. In 2008, worldwide tourism exceeded $1.1 trillion in export earnings. Some of the Canadian statistics you'll see, 2011 visitors to Canada from overseas, you know, $9.4 billion, and from the States, $7.4 billion. It's interesting to note that even in moments of, or times of recession, the tourism continues to grow. And some of the benefits and the costs of tourism, certainly, benefits of using tourism, foreign exchange, provides jobs, income, reduces poverty. And of course, some of those costs are pollution, congestion, loss of culture, and environmental degradation, and the lack of economic diversifications. And tourism is often used as a tool for development by local, regional, international governments, right? So I remember Jeff talking about, just earlier this year, I think, about a project he's running in Vietnam where, the rice crop failure has, there's less crops of rice, if one call that, or less harvesting of rice. And so then what else, what kind of other economic activity can we use in these areas to help those? But tourism is often considered. And for a variety of reasons, it's relatively low startup fees, and of course the increasing interest. And so understanding that tourism has costs, we as an industry have come to an understanding, or at least an acknowledgement that we need to do perhaps better, that needs to be more sustainable. So in this definition of sustainable tourism, from again the same UN organization, we see a lot of the same principles, right? So social, economic, environmental balance. But I really want to draw your attention, and as they say in good APA, the emphasis is mine, on its long-term sustainability. We talk about sustainability of tourism as an activity. And I would urge you to consider, or ask you to consider, what if it's not the sustainability of the tourism activity that we'd be looking for, but the sustainability of the community in which that activity can or cannot actually operate. Gianna Moscardo, a tourism scholar from Australia, urges tourism professionals to consider, is tourism the right fit for this community? So in hotels, I think we're all familiar with the sheet cards and the towel cards, right? I mean, they're become so ubiquitous. They're all over the place. And when we think of hotels and sustainability, well, we think of these cards, and we might think of the blue recycling bins that don't get emptied or do get emptied, as the case may be. And so how can we move past this? How can we move so that these cards move past these cards to more meaningful sustainability within certain hotels? And there is really an appetite, I think, for this in the research. I mean, basically, without an environment and social systems, we don't have tourism, right? I mean, so we do need healthy environmental and social systems. And there's a growing awareness of environmental issues. And through my career in the past 20-odd years, hotel executives and people with hotels, they understand that there is things called climate change and that we need to be doing something about it as a community. And in a survey by TIES, 2/3 of US and Australian travelers and 90% of British tourists consider hotels responsible for protecting the environment and supporting communities. And there's a continued growth in eco resorts and hotels estimated at 20% a year. So from a business perspective as a hotel industry, then it behooves us to look at, what does sustainability mean? And how then can we incorporate that if our customers, from a business perspective, who are looking at it from that perspective, are asking for it? We know we need to, but how? And that's the question when I talk to hospitality executives. Says, yes, we're all on the sustainability thing and we understand this, but how do we do this? So there's a lot of interest in exploring this, but questions around how to do it. So the research question asks, how do hotel leadership teams plan, develop, and implement strategies aimed at integrating sustainability into their current business model? And the sub-questions are, how do leadership practices change over time as members plan, develop, and implement sustainable strategies? And how does the sustainable tourism framework of scale, limits, place, and diversity contribute to the elaboration of these strategies? So the operational definition that I've been playing around with my supervisor is a tourism activity for sustainable tourism, a tourism activity that optimizes economic prosperity by respecting ecological limits, providing the capacity to innovate for continued development, promoting a strong identification to physical space, and encouraging diversity as necessary condition for resiliency. So let me just draw some examples to what that means. So we're talking about scale. Well, are our buildings and the activities that we offer commensurate with the physical environment that this location, this hotel is located? I was recently in Australia and went to the Uhu Ayers Rock, and there's this sprawling resort complex that offers a multitude of activities that when you sit back, you sort of say, well, this is not sustainable. They get an enormous amount of visitation here. So innovate, so building the capacity for innovation, that can mean knowledge, systems, etc. Place, connected to community, which is a specific, really interesting issue within hospitality, because when we think of hotels, we really don't think of them as being part of the community. There are somewhere people come to stay, usually from the outside. So then how can we create a sense of place or connection between that hotel and place? And diversity, really going beyond employment policies and procedures, but really encouraging diversity within the workplace. The research goals, so to assist leaders in incorporating a sustainability framework, investigating leadership practices, in incorporating this framework, and evaluating this operational definition. The outcomes, integration of sustainable strategy into the current business model, discovering the leadership practices, characteristics and skills, and what are those, and devising a leadership best practices model. Now the good stuff. All good. So target organizations are hotels. The target groups are hotel team leaders that want to integrate a sustainable development strategy into their current business model. Participants, hotel leaders, employees, executives, and customers of that hotel, and a multiple case study approach. Now, regarding the case selections, I have some thoughts around the criteria. If I'm going to do 3 cases, which is the intent, then how are those selected? One thought, and I encourage you to first give me your thoughts, would be to select hotels along a low to high level of integration that could be defined around certification processes. So there are certain sort of sustainable certification programs that I can then select amongst those hotels. But there might be other criteria as well. The research methodology. Combine action, research, case study approach. And I'll go into sort of action research, what case study is and how I see them combining or blending. So action research investigates changes and their effects, a disciplined inquiry, and a participatory process developing practical knowledge. And this is an example of Jacqueline and Howell's action research process, where the researcher arrives, has an idea of a framework, and then continues on, takes part, and then provides research findings and new things. Talking about case study, and the case study illuminates a decision or a set of decisions, why they were taken, how they were implemented, and what results. So they typically ask how and why questions or answer how and why questions, explores details of a particular case, and uses multiple data collection methods. And its ability to highlight distinctive concepts in order to arrive at a theory. So what might a blended approach look like? Well, there is some literature out there that action research should rely on the case study method, and that, and this is really interesting, sometimes in the literature there is there's an indication that action research should go beyond the consultancy role. That it should actually that true action research should provide practical knowledge and of course contribute to the creation of knowledge. They are both similar in that they provide thick description, gaining in-depth understanding of a particular phenomenon, and case study extended knowledge creation goals of action research, local knowledge to theory building. And this is in case study process where research would plan, design, and note the collect and the iterative process between the case study process. So, what information do I need? Well, one of the questions is, what does sustainability mean? We saw from the question, that I get asked, well, how are we going to define sustainability within this organization? So I'm thinking about a focus group, and then sort of setting metrics. How will we know when we've arrived, sort of at the end of this action research cycle, that we've actually have sustainability or created sustainability into our business model, and what are the current leadership practices throughout the project. And yes, inspired by Fernando's class, I decided to do a little bit of a timeline and, a little bit of indicating where, on a continuum, where you collect data and where the intervention takes place. Thank you. I thought I'd leave you with a Dr. Seuss quote. Brian.
Probably guess which slide I was. Can you go back to your research question?
Sure. You have been constantly in my thoughts this past year. You have.
So this question here, do you mean how do hotel leadership teams plan in the sense of a descriptive study? And is it your assumption that you'll be able to find a range of from poor to good practices, and by studying that you'll be able to draw lessons? Or do you mean do in a more prescriptive sense, meaning should? So what you want to do is answer questions that will help you to make that kind of prescription. How do you interpret that question?
What is the process of leaders in a leadership team, and how do they actually go through this process of implementing, planning, and developing strategies, sustainable strategies into their business model?
In some current examples, some current
Correct.
cases, with the intention of finding what?
Of finding out how these changes, and what are the changes in leadership practices as they incorporate these changes.
So could I follow up from that, please? You gave as an example of an unsustainable practice, the Uhuru Ayers Rock. Why was that unsustainable in your estimation?
Good question. Some of it was really, really basic. For example, use of styrofoam cups and stuff that, and things that were not recyclable, for example. So there was no recycling facilities. So that was something very practical. However, what made it unsustainable as well was, for example, the imprint of the resort is like a mini city out there. So, for example, it has provided its own towers for communication, has provided its own power sources, diesel, etc.
So I guess the thing that I was really struck by as I was listening to this is the connection between the context and the place and the people who are there, and that in fact sustainability from your perspective here is purely about the environmental pieces, but I'm wondering if you'd considered sort of looking at how does sustainability connect with the larger philosophical purpose of ecological tourism, which might in fact include the people who are there, how those pieces all connect together with the environment and with the context. Because there's a cultural piece here that I think I didn't see anywhere. I see it sort of somewhat embedded in the action research model from Czechland that you've got, but it doesn't show up anywhere else. And I just wondered if that was a scope issue, or if how did you see it?
I think in the operational definition that I'm using, the social part, in other words, how it's embedded, becomes really, really important. So people's identity, for example, well, how am I, as an employee, a customer, an owner, part of this greater culture? How does that then contribute to sustainability of this organization?
So it's all within the organization, it's not within
Oh, no, I think, no, the intent is to actually go outside the organization, because that's a really important part of the whole sustainability perspective, right, or approach. Jeff?
Interesting topic, and I guess just to follow up what Mel was saying, there's always a challenge when we look at sustainability in tourism, because the question is scale. You know, should we look at the hotels? So in at Laurel Point here, Victoria does wonderful work, but is the destination sustainable? Is Victoria as a destination sustainable? And I'm wondering, my sense with your question is that you're leaning more to look at the interaction of leaders in a hotel setting and how they plan, how they implement, and which is a noble focus. But I'm just wondering, have you thought about whether you want to focus? Because before I know you were talking about community tourism. So what changed your mind towards focusing specifically just on hotels versus what's happening in the larger community?
I guess I was trying to focus down. I said, well, like community, there are, I think I was trying to focus down the question, sort of say, so what's one key player in sustainability, in sustainable tourism, and certainly hotels are a key role.
There's a big movement right now is, of course, looking at destination management organizations and their need to, because the examples of great eco resorts, when they're placed into a larger destination that is not sustainable, they can't necessarily float. They can't float their sustainability, brand, as it were, because they're surrounded by a lot of unsustainable activities. So, but that is to look at the whole thing of sustainable tourism. What I see here, though, is a theme really focused on leadership decision making, right? So I'm just saying that as an observation, and maybe you want to comment on it. Is that what you're more interested in? Is like the whole actions of leaders and what's inspiring them to do these things, and then how it channels into their business model?
Yes, I think that's what I'm focusing on. It's really then how do leaders who understand that they need to be more sustainable with it, and then how do they actually incorporate it into their business models?
Second thing, are you going to then focus on best practice hotels in the world? So are you going to go to Scandic hotels, for example, or are you just going to pick anyone's?
Yeah, and there's a challenge with picking best practice hotels, because then sort of what are the criteria that makes it different? Are there hotels that do this better than others? For sure. It's establishing those criteria. So are they better, for example, at integrating into their community and taking along those dimensions, which I really haven't thought of. I mean, sort of one of the easier was one of the sort of ways I was thinking was going through a certification program, right? So hotels can. This global green. So if you're part of global green, then they've already vetted this organization for certain criteria. Then do I select some of those and then compare it with those hotels that may not be part of that certification process? But yes, yeah. Thank you. Yes, Robin.
I guess it just sort of builds on that, because it occurs to me, so I'm hearing this a little bit more now, this notion of exemplars that may, I won't ask you to go down to your sub-questions, but it's sort of getting at this. It seems like there's a lot in here. There's a lot of different directions, but I'm not sure that they're captured by your research question. And it doesn't sound, from what your most recent response, that it's just about hotel leadership teams, but leadership teams in exemplar, sustainability exemplars, or however you define that, and what they're doing. Because somewhere in your goals, I think maybe you want to switch. I don't know if those are easy to find. That there's some sense of moving this forward in some way, yeah? Mm-hmm. And so identifying what seems to be working in however you define it, and maybe there's multiple definitions and you have to explore, if you're going to continue with multiple case study, three different versions of exemplars of sustainability at that level, so that you're getting at some version of best practice. I can't remember who raised that issue of the best practice of that, if that is your intent, to uncover the characteristics and skills necessary to enact these leadership practices, right? So it's a possibility of way of narrowing it down if you're going to focus on hotels, given that, as you said, you could choose any number of them, but you might, you're right, you'll have to operationalize that, but you might choose exemplars from different operational definitions of what it means to be an exemplar in sustainability in order to dig down into some of this stuff.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the audience for your questions. I know there's, I'm actually very thankful it's been recorded so that they can review it later. Obviously, jotting notes down here. So that concludes today's Roots Research. You're welcome to join next week, same time, same place, for the second half of the cohort. Thank you. Thank you.